Welcome back to France Made Simple, the podcast where I demystify life in France and tell it like it really is. Now, this morning, I'm going to talk about reasons to come on holiday or reasons to move to France. They both apply whether you're visiting on a sort of short-term basis or planning to be here permanently. There are some very, very good reasons to come to France. So number one on my list, and probably the biggest draw for everybody, and the one thing that people always, the first word that pops into your head, the one thing that people always associate with France is food. French cuisine is renowned worldwide. It is quite amazing. And whether you're eating in a little kind of restaurant that serves truckers known as Les Routiers, or in a Michelin-starred establishment, you are always going to be in for a treat in France. So when you come on holiday to France, and if you're looking for restaurants in a local area, at lunchtime, if you notice there's lots of white vans outside, that's always a very good sign, because it means that it's popular with the locals and the workers. And places that don't consistently serve good food, they don't last, especially these days. Everybody's feeling the pinch budget-wise. If there are lots of people in there and eating, that's going to be a good sign, and you're very unlikely to be disappointed. There may not be a huge choice. I always recommend going for the daily special, because that's inevitably going to be like the freshest and the most seasonal produce, because that's what the restaurants have got, and it's fairly cheap because it's in season. So you're going to eat really good food at a low price. If you want to go, Michelin starred and push the budget out, then those options are available in France too. And I recently had an evening in a Michelin-starred private hotel restaurant members club in Paris, and it was one of the most amazing experiences of my entire life. Everything was perfect in terms of service, attention to detail. It was worth every penny, especially as I wasn't paying. But it was, one of those experiences that I'm very glad I had. So, French food is great. There are markets where you can go and get fresh produce, cafes, bistros, restaurants. There's something for everybody. Even vegetarians are being catered for much, much better these days. It used to be the case that the only vegan option was an omelette, which may or may not have had ham in it, not even veggie, let alone vegan. But, things have improved, and there are restaurants that really do cater for vegetarians, vegans, so forth. In the larger cities, in rural France, it's still a bit more hit and miss. But French food is right up there. And it doesn't even have to be in a restaurant. I mentioned markets where you can go and buy, fresh homemade bread, locally produced goat's cheese from a small scale producer, some tomatoes. You can go and make yourself a little picnic. Everything will just taste amazing. So food is really, really good. Having said that, it can be a bit traditional, and, as a British person living in France full time, especially living in rural France, I do really miss being able to go for an Indian or some, proper ethnic food. We're very spoilt in the UK. And in Paris, you can get pretty amazing ethnic food. I was in Paris about 5 months ago, and we had lunch in the Armenian Social Club, and it was amazingly cheap, kind of €10 a head, and absolutely delicious. So, Paris and other very large cities, especially those with a sort of, um, an immigrant population, you are going to be able to find really good ethnic food. But outside of that, forget it. If you are in a small town in Brittany and see an Indian restaurant, it's unlikely to be good. Or even if it is good, and we did go to an Indian restaurant in Brittany quite recently. And Monsieur had a vindaloo. And let me tell you, it was not a vindaloo as we know it. I could eat it. He quite likes a bit of heat, actually. He's quite atypical as French people go, because lots of them consider that tomato ketchup is spicy. And I, honest to God, have heard French people saying, "Ooh, ça pique." No, tomato ketchup doesn't peak. A vindaloo peaks, but not tomato ketchup. But anyway, his vindaloo was perfectly nice, but it was not a vindaloo as I know them. But anyway, so apart from the sort of lack of ethnic food outside of big cities, although that can be an upside, many Brits get very good at making their own naan breads and curries. Generally, French food is of an incredibly high standard, and it's one of the highlights of living here is being able to eat such great food on a regular basis. And it's also, when you're on holiday here, it's a holiday highlight. So my advice to you, if you're on holiday here, is forget the diets, forget about being able to get into your tight jeans, sit back, eat and enjoy. Number 2 on my list is the landscape. And France is a pretty amazing country in terms of the fact that you've got mountains, valleys, gorges, Mediterranean beaches, Atlantic beaches, the Normandy bocage, which is small fields with hedges. You've got, it's just such a range of landscape and terrain. And it means, there is a downside to this as well. I think that the French historically have not travelled as much as other countries because they haven't needed to. You don't need to leave France to go skiing. So this has made them a little more insular and maybe less cosmopolitan than certainly the British, because we have to leave the country to go anywhere on holiday. You can't really lie on a sandy beach in the UK. Well, okay, there are some sandy beaches, but then it's not like being on a beach in Italy where you like plunge into crystal clear water that's bath temperature. No, you're kind of lying on the shingle in Brighton thinking, maybe I'll brave a swim, but I didn't bring my flask of hot chocolate with me, so maybe not today. Anyway, great landscape in France, something for everybody, whatever kind of countryside or environment you're into, you will be able to find it in France. And there is just so much difference. And even after 23 years here, I'm still only scraping the surface of what all the different regions in France have to offer. We went down to the Morvan about 6 months ago to visit my partner's family, and I was amazed at the kind of wild sauvage, the wildness of the countryside there and the isolation and the sheer beauty of it. And, there are masses of walking trails and bridle paths there. And I just thought, I'd love to come back here on holiday. We went when it was freezing and quite miserable weather-wise. I thought I would love to come back here on holiday when the weather's good and we can go hiking and explore even more. So, there is so much regional variation in France, and it means that you don't actually even need to go very far to find something new and different. If you're living here full time, you can happily holiday in France. And if you're coming here on holiday, obviously lots of people end up coming back to the same regions because they like them so much. But equally, you can always find something new, a different region to come to on holiday and explore. Then there's the history, the chateaus, the churches, the art, the culture. And especially for, I think, people who come from newer countries, I'm thinking Australia, America, places like that, just being able to almost travel back in time and visit those medieval cities and churches and buildings is quite amazing. And it's something that even for me, that pleasure doesn't pale. I just love looking at the architecture that surrounds me. Even in our local town, which is nothing special, we were in there yesterday morning wandering around the side streets off the market and just looking at the doors and window frames and old stonework and old ironwork. Just absolutely amazing. And so French history and culture is, I think, a really big draw for people who are coming here on holiday. And I don't mean just the obvious stuff like the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower. There is so much history and culture in France. The smallest of small villages will have an amazing church. And it's a bit of a joke in our household because Monsieur does like a church, and wherever we go, we have to pop into a church and have a look round. But it's just amazing how different they all are and how interesting the different styles of architecture and decoration are. So, number 3, culture. Now, I mentioned the coast previously, but I think I have to include the coastline as number 4 as another big draw in France, especially for holidaymakers, but also for those of us that live here year round. Again, there are so many different types of coastlines in France, from, rocky outcrops to cliffs to sandy beaches. And the coast in northern France in the winter is quite magical because, and in the southwest, actually, there are very few people around on the beaches all year round. And being able to walk the dog on the beach in the middle of winter, and you get the most beautiful light and colours, and it's just magical. And in terms of water sports, whether you're into, sea kayaking, windsurfing, paddleboarding, sailing, there are so many places in France to do that, all of which, have their special thing. It's just fabulous. And we went on holiday to Brittany a couple of times last year, and it was really interesting to see how, for the locals, that was their lifestyle. All the kids had small boats or paddle boards, and that was the culture. You just kind of come home from school and get out on the water. And if you're into outdoor activities, which is my next point, although that's kind of got mixed up with the coast and the weather, France, the French coastline, is an absolutely fabulous place to be to do anything that's water sports related. So I've mentioned activities, and I think that's probably going to have to be number 5 on the list, because the diversity of the kind of landscape in France means that you can do just about anything here. When I lived down near the Pyrenees, lots of my friends went paragliding at the weekends. People go mountaineering, hiking, skiing in the winter. Equally, a lot of diving off the southwest coast down there in the harbours around Socorro and Saibor. Lots of sailing. Cycling is massive in France, obviously, with the Tour de France, and every weekend, or actually not even every weekend, every day you'll see hundreds of cyclists out on the roads, both individually and in groups. Cycling, horse riding, fishing, everything and anything that you can think of to do outside, you can do in France. And again, obviously, whether you're coming here on holiday or moving here, if you've got a particular passion and you are into paragliding, for example, then you might want to holiday near to a centre where you can do that, or maybe even go and live somewhere where you can do that on a regular basis. And that is one of the most wonderful things about France, is that whatever you want to do in terms of outside activity or sports, there'll be somewhere where you can do it. The French are very sporty. It's seen as a very, very important part of everyday life here. If you go to the doctors for a checkup, they will ask you what sport you do. It's expected that everybody does some kind of sport. And whether you want to do mountain biking or, just off-road biking or road biking, there will be cycle paths, trails, tracks everywhere in the regions where that's a kind of thing. So, I think that France is really, really good for people who like to have an active lifestyle. And I said 5 points, and this is point 6, but the weather. But with the exception of food, because we can always eat food inside, I think the weather probably comes into maybe the history, because you can visit chateaus in the rain. The weather also sort of plays a part in all the other categories that I've mentioned, because the weather is better than in the UK. Even in the north of France, the weather is that bit milder than in the south of the UK. Spring comes that bit earlier. The winters are not quite so harsh. Obviously, the further south you go, the hotter it gets. And with climate change now, some regions are becoming a bit too hot or a bit more extreme, as in more wind, snow, and rain in the winter. But, you can still find places in France where there are 4 seasons. And I think it's just more sunshine makes everybody feel better. And obviously, if you are a sun lover, then head for those regions, whether it's a holiday or a permanent move, which get more sunshine. But even the north of France is pretty sunny and a very nice place to live in. It's certainly not as cold and wet as it was sort of 20 years ago. So let's hope it doesn't get too hot over the next few years. But yeah, weather is a big factor. And obviously that helps with exploring the landscape, doing those outdoor activities, and just visiting chateaus and churches and historic towns, because if it's not freezing cold and pouring with rain, everything is that bit more enjoyable. So there you go. Those are my 5 top reasons to go on holiday to or move here to France: the food, the landscape, the history, the coastline, the weather, and everything that you can do here on a regular an almost daily basis. France is really set up for people to get the most out of their lives. So, as you can tell, most of the time I love living here. I do occasionally lose it and have a complete meltdown about administration, or the fact that French people tend to keep their dogs on a lead on the beach or something like that. But that's petty stuff. On balance, it's a brilliant place to live. I love it, and I hope this episode has inspired you to come visit and maybe even come and move here and live on a permanent basis. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. I'm off now, and have a great week, and I will catch up with you soon. Bye.